It's good to be with you here today. And it feels a lot better in here than it does outside, so I'm happy for that. Some years ago, I remember, most of you know I have 3 brothers, and I remember when my older brother Kenny was baptized. We had a speaker, I forget if it was a meeting or something, he went forward along with 2 of my cousins and was baptized. But on the way home, we were sitting I always sat behind Dad, and Kenny sat behind Mom, my brother Burl in the middle in the back seat. And on the way home, they were talking about Kenny being baptized, and Burl turned around and goes, "Let's make him sin." Make him sin. Like it was like the devil incarnate, He thought he was being funny, something like that. But I want you to think about that for a moment. Have you ever made someone sin? Have you ever wanted to make someone sin? I hope not. Because what does God think about causing others to sin? And turn with me, if you will, to Matthew chapter 18. Matthew 18, we're going to read verses 2 through 9. It says, "Then Jesus called a little child to him, set him in the midst of them, and said, Assuredly I say to you, unless you are converted and become as little children, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself as this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever receives one little child like this in my name receives me. But whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him if a millstone were hung around his neck and he were drowned in the depth of the sea. Woe to the world because of offenses, for offenses must come, but woe to that man by whom the offense comes. If your hand or foot causes you to sin, cut it off and cast it from you. It is better for you to enter into life lame or maimed rather than having 2 hands or 2 feet to be cast into the everlasting fire. And if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and cast it from you. It is better for you to enter into life with 1 eye rather than having 2 eyes to be cast into hellfire." I think we see quite vividly what Jesus thinks about causing others to sin. He talks about him as a little child. He talks about making a believer sin. So it'd be better for him if you put a millstone around their neck and threw them in the ocean. It's like the old mafia thing, giving people cement shoes, and cast them into the lake so they drown. Because it's not going to be good for that person. He said, if your hand or foot causes you sin, cut it off. If your eye causes you sin, pluck it out. Because sin is that bad. Some years later, Kenny, who became a preacher, he was going to Africa. And I said, well, bring me something from Africa. He said, I could bring you Ebola. We don't want Ebola, do we? That's very, very bad. That's where it just I don't know if it's a virus or what, but it just turns your insides to mush and you die from it pretty bad. And so things like that we don't want. And we think about Ebola, we think about the Black Plague. Sin is worse. Sin is worse because it can send us to hell. Remember in Hebrews chapter 9, verse 22, it talks about without shedding of blood, there is no remission. And in our case, it was Christ shedding his blood that we can get remission of sins. Well, in Old Testament times, they did sacrifices. You sinned, you had to sacrifice. You had to kill something to make up for it. It took shedding of blood. They did so many sacrifices. We're talking about thousands of animals a day. That in the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, there were trenches cut into the pavement to carry away the blood because sin is that bad. So, if sin's that bad, would you want to make someone else sin? Have you ever done it? You know, in Galatians chapter 2, verses 11 through 13, it talks about Paul confronting Peter because he was to blame. Because he was mingling with the Gentile Christians, but when some, came from Jerusalem, from the Jewish side, he quit mingling with them, and he caused others to do so as well by his example. He caused them to sin. And Peter was to be blamed for that. Here's Peter, the apostle, the one who says, Jesus, you're the Son of God. Okay. He caused other people to sin. And Paul had to call him out for it. And maybe we can do the same. We can, through our example, we cause others to sin. In Titus chapter 1, it talks about an elder, verse 6, 7, must be above reproach. Well, why? Well, because an elder, through his example, can cause others to sin. Because we should look up to elders, but maybe someone looks up to you. Do they? Maybe it's your children, family, friends, or coworkers. People look up to you. You may have people looking up to you that you don't even know are doing so. After I got out, I think I was in graduate school by that time. I got a letter from a guy I went to high school with. Really surprised me, and he asked me in that letter, he said, why I never, snuck out with the other guys who went drinking, why I didn't use bad language, stuff like that. He said, was it because of your faith? And I said, well, yes, it was. I never suspected he was even interested or noticed something like that. So you may be an example to someone and not even know it. But that also means, could you lead someone astray? Cause them to sin. What about if, Sunday afternoon, I'm a firm believer, I've come to realize Sunday afternoon was made to take a nap. Okay. And so you're in there, you're going to take a nap, and the phone rings, and one of your kids answers the phone, and someone, maybe someone you work with, that you really don't want to talk to. Do you yell and tell him I'm asleep, I'm taking a nap? Well, if you did that, what did you just teach your children? It's okay to lie, right? When the situation calls for it, it's okay to lie. Because kids pick up on things like that. I remember this, I actually just saw this episode again like a week ago. Andy Griffith, watch Andy Griffith growing up, and Opie. Opie and I are the same age. Okay. And actually when he was born and lived about 3 miles from me. Okay. So I could always watch Andy Griffith and know, that's how big I was when this was filmed. But there's the episode where the Darlings, some of the country hill people, the Darlings come to town. They're sitting around eating dinner, and they pass the plate, and it gets to Mr. his potatoes or something, and it's empty. And he yells out, "Potatoes!" And Aunt Bee runs out, and she'll get more potatoes. Well, it goes around again, the meat. This time Mr. yells out, "Meat!" And then last time they pass the bread, comes around to Opie. And there's no bread. Opie yells out, "Bread!" Because he picked up on what the older people were doing. And kids do that. They pick up, they look up to us and look to us for examples. Well, let me ask this. Are you a Christian? Are you a believer? And the reason I ask that way is because belief alone does not make someone a Christian. In James chapter 2, verse 24, it says, "You see then that man is justified by works and not by faith only." In John chapter 1, verse 12, "But as many as received him, to them he gave the right to become children of God, to them who believe in his name." Belief in Jesus doesn't make you a Christian. He gives you the right to become a Christian because you have to believe in order to be baptized. Gives you the right to become a Christian, but doesn't make you a Christian. And yet, I know some people who believe in Jesus who have never been baptized. And one of them is because his family are Christians, but his dad is not. And so he feels some camaraderie with his dad, like he's supporting his dad by not being baptized. You know what? If both their souls are lost, his dad will hate him in hell for not doing something to show him that he believed in Jesus, that he was baptized, and would maybe have caused his dad to be baptized as well and save his soul. But because this person, I think he put his dad above Christ. Actually, he put everything above his dad. Don't you want your parents to go to heaven? Do you want your kids to go to heaven? Do you believe but you've never been baptized? Well, maybe you're holding someone back. And we're causing them to sin. Or maybe, I believe we're just lazy. That can happen too, can't it? Maybe we don't come to services that much. Church is nice, but it's not that important. But it's kind of like peer pressure, right? We look at others. Maybe in one sense it's like giving a pill to a horse. You know how you give a pill to a horse, don't you? You get a long tube and you put the pill in the tube and you stick one in the horse's mouth and one in your mouth, and then it's just a matter of who blows first. And maybe we think we're helping someone, but we're not, and maybe we're actually hurting them by our example. And especially if we're a teacher, because we have influence, on others. When my nephew Gary was in 5th grade, I actually was good friends with this teacher and known her for some time. And I was visiting school and I sat in on his class, and she's up there, she's talking about something about math, and she going on, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, that's not right. I started shaking my head like that, and she got all flustered and stopped and went on to a different topic. But if we're teachers, we can certainly lead people astray. And I can tell you, you can go to many buildings here in town right now, and you'll help people teach about God, something that is not true, and can lead them astray. And anytime someone gets up and teaches a class, or presents a sermon, or even just talks to someone, we need to make sure that what we're teaching is right. In James 3, verse 1, it says, teachers will face a stricter judgment. In Acts 18, verse 24-26, it talks about the apostles, or Apollos, how Priscilla and Aquila heard him teach. It says he was mighty in the scripture. But they took him aside and taught him privately because there were some things he was leaving out. He didn't know everything, and so he wasn't telling the full gospel. 1 Timothy 3 talks about teach someone who needs to be able to teach, a bishop. We need to go to that point. And to do that, though, we have to learn, right? We have to know it ourselves. I worked with a place one time. There was a woman there, maybe 20 or so. She was teaching her Bible study class. And she was talking about something or other, and I was going to tell her something. I said, well, in 1 Corinthians, so-and-so, and she said, 1 Corinthians. Now, is that in the Old or the New Testament? Well, teachers probably know that. If you're going to teach it. And one thing I've learned at being a teacher, I teach college now, is the best way to learn something is to get up and teach it yourself. Because it forces you to know, and you got to deal with things. But to do that, in 2 Timothy 2:15, Paul writes to Timothy, says, study to show thyself approved, rightly dividing the word of truth. Study to show yourself approved. And we talk about rightly dividing. What's that mean? It means you break it up and get the parts right. Rightly divide. I think I've told the story here before about when I was at military academy and you'd eat a meal and you had to, one guy had the job, he was the gunner, he had to split up the whatever dessert into equal numbers. He had 10 people at a table. And he would hold up the dessert and he'd announce the dessert and say, does anyone not care for dessert? And if you didn't want dessert, you stuck your fist out. And he was allowed to glance down the table and count the number of fists. And then if one person didn't want dessert, instead of dividing dessert into 10 pieces, he divided into 9 pieces. Okay? And this creates a problem when you have something like pie, because he had to cut the pie. And so, sure enough, one day a guy holds up the pie and says, sir, for dessert, we're having cherry pie. Will anyone not care for dessert today, please, sir? And he looked down and one person stuck his hand out. So that means he had to cut the pie into 9 equal pieces. Because if you get some too big, you're too small, you're cheating your classmates. So you're supposed to make a template and take it in your hat, but he didn't do that. So he's trying to cut a pie in 9 equal pieces. Now, if he'd been smart, he wouldn't have eaten pie either and cut it into 8. Okay. But he's trying to cut it in 9. He had some pieces this wide and some that wide. And the table counter looked down and says, mister, you're making a mess of that pie. You better do something about it. And so the kid, now you got to imagine the kid sitting there at attention, his eyes on the plate, and he takes his knife, sticks it in the pie, and rips it to shreds. And when he gets done, he holds up and says, sir, for dessert, we're having Cherry's Jubilee. Because there's a difference, right? You just take a glob of Cherry's Jubilee and put it on the plate. And that's how some people view the Word of God. I'll take this part here and I'll do that, but not this part over here. I don't want that part there. I don't want that part there. But these ones here that I like, that's what I'm going to use. That's not rightly dividing the word of truth. We have to look at all of it, and we have to make it mesh together. Because if we're teaching and we don't do that, I might be causing someone to sin. And we have a duty to get it right. We have a duty to our spouse. You know, do you want to cause your spouse to sin? You want to drive them away, maybe nag them? 1 Corinthians 7 verse 5 talks about, lest Satan tempt your spouse. Matthew 5, you do something that causes her to commit adultery. You don't want to do that. You want to help them get to heaven. Same with the children, right? Ephesians 6 verse 4, fathers, provoke not your children to wrath. Don't push them away from the Lord, bring them to the Lord. But part of that, in Proverbs 13, talking about if you spare the rod, you spoil the child. That means you correct them when they're wrong. Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way he should go. Have you ever heard this? Ever heard someone have kids and you talk about, church and stuff, and they say, well, we're just going to let them grow up and then make up their own mind. Really? Do you do that with anything else? You do that with arithmetic? Well, 2 plus 2, I'm going to let them grow up and make up their own mind what that adds up to. Do you do it with obeying the traffic laws? No, it's the responsibility to bring them up in the way he should go. Ezekiel chapter 33 talks about a watchman looking over a place, and he said, you know, if he sounds the alarm, something bad happens, he sounds the alarm and bad stuff comes and happens, he says he's okay. But if he sees bad things coming and he doesn't sound the alarm and bad stuff happens, the blood's on his head. Well, what about raising a child and never teaching them about God? And that child is lost. Who bears the responsibility? Well, the child does, but so do you. Because there's a responsibility to do that. So, do you want your kids to go to heaven? We say, well, yeah. Let me ask this. We all know probably some families where, you know, maybe they come every once in a while. Maybe you'd see them, you know, I know some that I see maybe twice a month at service, something like that. Okay. And they had like 4 kids. How many of them do you think are faithful today? 0. You know any families like that? Where the parents just are, oh, yeah, we'll go to church today, nothing else to do or something. How many other kids are faithful? Because they set an example that it really doesn't matter. Do you want your kids to go to heaven? That means you got to do something, right? We think, oh yeah, I got to feed them. I got to work all the time. Just I got to get them through school. How about getting them to heaven? It means we have to do something. Or let me ask this. Let's say there's this teenage girl and she has a boyfriend, new boyfriend, and he's going to come over. They're going to watch the Bears play football. Her dad's a big Bears fan, you know, and stuff. They're going to watch a football game on Sunday afternoon, and she wants him to come over. She's going to introduce him to her parents, you know. And so they're going to watch the football game, and she goes, oh, by the way, wear your Green Bay shirt, because he's a Green Bay fan. Okay. You think she would do that with her dad being a big Bears fan? You think she'd say, wear your Green Bay shirt? No. Because she wants her dad to think well of him. Yeah. Okay. What about wearing less clothes in the summer because it's hot outside and being immodest and causing him to sin by putting thoughts into his head? Would you want to do something which makes him in bad favor of his God in heaven? Would you do that to him? If you wouldn't do it to him for your own dad, would you do it to him for his Father in heaven? Be it modest, because that causes other people to sin. If you like someone, you want your folks to like them too, but you want God to like them too, don't you? We should. Then let's not cause them to sin. Look over in Matthew chapter 22, verses 36 through 39. Someone speaks, Jesus says, teacher, which is the great commandment of the law? Jesus said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love your neighbor. Who's your neighbor? Everyone is your neighbor. You should love your neighbor as yourself. You should be thoughtful of them and not do something where you want to cause them or that you cause them to sin, because there's consequences with it. Well, let me ask this. Have you ever caused someone to die? Wouldn't that be really bad? Wouldn't that affect your whole life? You know, some years ago when I was in graduate school, I went to grad school in Columbia, Missouri. I come home and visit my parents down around Rantoul. And going back, I would drive east and get on Route 54, two-lane highway, and take Route 54. And back then it went through Clinton, Illinois, and on down to Springfield. I'd pick up the interstate in Springfield. And so this one afternoon, I was heading back to school, and I came down to Clinton. As I got to Clinton, there had been a traffic accident right in front of me. Police weren't even there yet. And there was a semi-truck pulled over alongside the road, and here was a car that had been hit and bashed in, basically sitting in the middle of the road. And I stopped. There was a couple other cars stopped, and there were 3 people in the hit car. 3 men, 2 in the front and 1 in the back, and all 3 of them were either dead or unconscious. Okay. And what had happened was a semi had come into town, and this car had pulled out right in front of him, and he couldn't avoid it, and he hit it. And what I remember most about that is the driver of the semi was standing over to the side with another guy they were talking to, and the driver was bawling like a baby because he was convinced he had just killed 3 people. A little while later, the police got there. It turned out he hadn't killed any of them. I thought this odd. He knocked all 3 of them unconscious. They were all unconscious. But think about that. He thought he had killed 3 people. He's going along, minding his own business. He didn't do anything wrong. This car pulled out in front of him, and he hit it, and he thought he killed 3 people. And that would have changed his life forever. So let me ask, have you ever killed someone? Because I got to tell you, I have. And so have you. Because of my sin, Jesus died. And it didn't matter if everyone else that ever lived a perfect life. Because of my sin, Jesus died. I killed someone. And I should think about that every day of my life. That someone gave his life for me. He didn't have to. As was said this morning, he asked in the garden, is there another way? But when God said, no, there's no other way, he gave his life for me. And let's keep that in mind. Let's work not only that we get to heaven, but we help others to get to heaven and not cause them to sin. If you're here this morning and you have need to do something so that you get to heaven and maybe be an example to help someone else get to heaven, if you need to be baptized or need to confess sin, won't you come while we stand and we sing.